Welcome to Shadow Fable. Don't forget to subscribe. I remember the way the embers glowed in the snow that night, bright sparks dancing in a swirl of ash. They framed the silhouette of my son's bedroom window as our house smoldered. Even though no one could have survived the inferno, for one disorienting second, I was convinced I saw him standing there, a small hand pressed against the glass. His eyes fixed on me, like I was the one trapped inside the flames instead of him. And then, everything collapsed into a roar of fire and splintering wood, swallowing that final glimpse in a storm of swirling sparks. In the weeks after the funeral, a smothering silence settled over the small town of Gracetown, Maine. Neighbors brought casseroles and whispered their condolences, avoiding my gaze as if my grief might infect them. Some left flowers on the charred remains of the house, just off the gravel road, but no one dared linger long. The scorched skeleton of the place was like an open wound in the heart of our community. I moved in temporarily with my sister Ruth, while awaiting insurance paperwork and finalizing details for a new home. She lived a few blocks away, in a rickety Victorian with peeling paint and narrow windows that never closed properly. It wasn't comfortable, but anything was better than the half-burned husk of my life. That's what I told myself anyway, until the nightmares started. Every evening, I lay stiff in a borrowed bed, hearing phantom footsteps on the stairs, or a creak in the hall that I was certain matched my son's light tread. I'd rush to open the door, only to find the hallway empty and the night unbroken, save for my own unsteady breath. A month slipped by, then two. I visited my son's grave each morning. There, in the biting winter wind, I'd stare at the gravestone etched with his name, Henry Morrison, 7 years old. I'd lay a small wooden toy car on the snowy grass, the same one he used to drive around the kitchen table, making brrm sounds between spoonfuls of cereal. His mother, my wife, was never there. We'd separated long before the fire. The distance between us had been growing for years, but Henry's death sealed that chasm for good. She never even called after he died. Part of me felt a smoldering anger, but mostly I just felt hollow. Then, on a chilly Thursday afternoon, it happened. I was walking past the burned shell of my former home, peering through a hole in the blackened fence as I always did. I couldn't stop myself. I needed to see it. And there, in the slanting sun, I spotted footprints in the ash. Small, barefoot tracks leading toward the collapsed back porch. They looked fresh. Sharp edges, no drift from the wind. Exactly the right size for a child of 7. My heart thumped so hard it nearly robbed me of breath. I stumbled across the yard to confirm. The footprints led in a narrow line, then vanished amid the debris. I felt cold sweat trickle down the back of my neck. It was impossible, of course, yet my eyes told me otherwise. A swirl of half-remembered true crime stories crowded my mind, cases where family members insisted a missing loved one was still alive. How neighbors would feed into the delusion, leading to frantic hunts through attics and barns. But Henry wasn't missing. His body had been found, identified, and buried. There'd been a closed casket funeral. I forced myself to move on, ignoring the frantic beat of my heart. That night, I sat at my sister's dining table, swirling whiskey in a tumbler. The overhead light buzzed, a single moth flickering near the bulb. Ruth watched me from across the room, frowning. She'd once worked as a psychiatric nurse in a clinic 2 towns over, and I could see her old instincts kicking in. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she ventured softly. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. Finally, the words tumbled out. There were footprints at the house. She set her mug of tea down. Kids fooling around, maybe? Bare feet in this weather? They matched Henry's size. Ruth pressed her lips tight. Her eyes grew moist, but she wouldn't let herself cry. "Grief can do cruel things," she said. "It can trick your mind, make you see what you desperately want to see." I nodded, but the uneasy feeling twisted in my gut. I didn't want to see Henry's footprints. That was the worst part. I wanted to move on, yet something was drawing me back. The following day, I decided to check in with a friend of mine, a part-time deputy named Sam Wilcox. He'd worked a series of missing persons cases, some with bizarre leads that turned out to be illusions or hoaxes. Maybe he could talk sense into me. When I arrived at the rundown county sheriff's station, Sam was behind his desk, flipping through old case files with a bored expression. His face hardened the moment he saw me. "Hey," he said quietly. "How you holding up?" I hesitated, then blurted, "I saw footprints by the old place. Kid-sized." Sam leaned forward, cautious. "You sure?" I explained everything. The snowfall, the ash, how the prints seemed too fresh. But as I spoke, a wave of self-consciousness washed over me. Even in my own ears, I sounded like a desperate father chasing a ghost. Sam didn't look dismissive, though. If anything, he looked unsettled. "I'll come by this weekend," he said, scribbling a note. "We'll take a look, but hey, I gotta ask, are you sleeping? Sometimes..." "I'm fine," I snapped, standing. "I'm not seeing things." Sam raised a placating hand. "Understood." I paced out of the station, feeling his eyes on my back. There was pity there, but also a shade of uncertainty. That kind of expression you give someone when you're not entirely convinced they're telling the whole truth. On Saturday morning, as promised, Sam arrived in his worn-down patrol car. It was bitterly cold, the kind of damp chill that sticks to your bones. We trudged through the blackened yard together. Snow crunched beneath our boots, revealing no trace of any footprints. A recent dusting covered everything in a fresh, powdery blanket. If footprints had existed, they were long gone. Then we heard a car door slam. We turned to see my neighbor, an older woman named Kathleen Harris, standing at the edge of the yard. I'd grown up seeing her round town. She was known for her wide-brimmed hats and suspicious nature. She looked pale, eyes darting as if she expected to see something unnatural among the charred debris. "Mrs. Harris," Sam called politely. "Something you need?" She clutched her purse. "I was coming back from the market, saw you both here, been meaning to say something about the boy." Sam and I exchanged glances. My pulse quickened. Kathleen wet her lips. "I saw him last week by the fence." She turned to me, her voice trembling. At first, I thought it was just someone's kid wandering, but then it looked like Henry, wearing that little blue coat. The old woman's voice cracked. "Couldn't be him, though, right? Couldn't be." My mouth went dry. Sam stiffened, turning back to me. I felt an irrational jolt of vindication, but it was mixed with a colder dread. If neighbors were seeing Henry, either something real was happening, or we were all in the grip of a shared delusion. Folie à plusieurs, a phenomenon I'd heard about once in a battered psychology magazine at the library. But no matter how I spun it, I couldn't wrap my head around it. Sam cleared his throat. "We'll look into it, Mrs. Harris. Thanks for telling us." He ushered her along. She scurried back to her car, as if relieved to leave us behind. I kicked at a fallen plank of blackened wood. "You think she just wants attention?" Sam gave me a long look. "She's never been the type to make things up." He paused. "Remember that Blevins case over in Addison County, 1976? The entire neighborhood claimed to see the missing boy weeks after he disappeared. Some folks even reported talking to him. turned out to be mass hysteria, some kind of coping mechanism. People were sure they'd seen him, but they were just seeing shadows, or reading random kids' faces as his. Grief, guilt. It can do strange things to your mind. I forced a half smile, but the expression felt warped. So, we're all going mad? Sam shrugged. Let's just say, keep your eyes open. A few days later, the sightings multiplied. 2 or 3 more neighbors, quiet folks who rarely spoke to me before, knocked on Ruth's front door. They claimed they glimpsed Henry near the corner store or wandering along the snowy sidewalk. Some insisted he looked frightened, darting between parked cars. Others swore he stared right at them with haunted eyes. Most were uncertain, wanting reassurance that they weren't losing their minds. Each time, I found myself muttering the same phrase. It couldn't have been Henry, but my tone wavered with each retelling. The entire town was caught in an eerie hush, as though any moment we might all open our doors to find Henry, barefoot and shivering, waiting on the porch. One raw, overcast afternoon, I visited the county library. My intention was to distract myself, to flip through old newspapers and bury my mind in quiet routine. Instead, I found myself in the true crime section, scanning accounts of unexplained sightings, missing children who supposedly haunted their old neighborhoods. The stories ranged from obvious hoaxes to mass psychological illusions triggered by grief. I read about cult-like gatherings where people convinced themselves a messiah figure had returned from the dead. They believed it so completely, they'd see him in a passing stranger's face. A memory flickered back. The glimpse of Henry in the burning house, mere seconds before the roof caved in. My rational brain knew that was impossible. Yet the image remained locked in my mind, shining through the flames. That night, I dreamt of the fire again, but this time I was inside Henry's room. I couldn't feel heat, the flames were silent, like a movie on mute. And in the corner, Henry stood with his back to me, scribbling in a blackened notebook, his shoulders trembling as though he were sobbing. When I touched his shoulder, he turned. Only it wasn't Henry's face at all, it was my own, twisted by agony. I woke, soaked in sweat, the taste of ash in my mouth. I'd never been one to put stock in dreams, but each morning the leftover dread clung to me. At dawn, I drove to the cemetery, stepping through the drifted snow to Henry's grave. A single crow perched on the headstone, croaking in the icy air. I closed my eyes, letting the hush wash over me. Behind my eyelids, I imagined my son's small shape, his laughter, the warmth of his hand in mine. But that was all it was. Memory. A cough startled me. When I turned, there stood a figure in a heavy coat. My wife, Suzanne. I hadn't seen her in months. She looked gaunt, eyes rimmed with bruised circles, hair matted beneath a black knit cap. She approached slowly, as if uncertain I'd accept her presence. "I kept away," she said, voice trembling. "I didn't think I just wasn't ready, but with all these sightings." Her gaze drifted to Henry's grave, and a tear glimmered on her cheek. Word had reached her, apparently. I knew she'd moved south to a friend's place after we separated, fleeing the cold and our constant arguments. We'd fought over so many things: money, trust, Henry's schooling, my late nights. In the end, nothing was resolved, and it broke Henry's heart. Now, with him gone, there was nothing left to do but blame ourselves. "They say they see him," she whispered, eyes dark on mine. "And you?" I swallowed. "I haven't actually seen him, not awake at least." She touched the gravestone lightly. "I keep thinking about that night. The last time we spoke on the phone, I told him I'd come visit, and I never did. So, if there's a chance. She trailed off, tears sliding down. A chill wind whipped across the cemetery, rattling bare branches overhead. The hush felt deafening. I hesitated, then slowly reached out to place a hand on her shoulder. We stood together, letting the bitter air steal words from our lips. The moment felt fragile, like we were standing on the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to leap back into illusions or cling to reality. By the end of the week, the tensions in town reached a boiling point. A local forum online lit up with frantic posts. Another Henry sighting? Is the Morrison boy alive? People spun theories. He'd run away before the fire, or there was some mysterious cover-up. Worse, a handful of conspiracy-minded folks insisted the entire tragedy had been staged, pointing at me as a suspect for insurance fraud or something darker. On a damp Friday, I was called to the sheriff's station again. Sam greeted me outside, wearing an expression of guarded confusion. "We had another report from a couple who live near the old lumber mill," he said. "They claim Henry approached them begging for help, then vanished. They're insistent, no doubt at all. I had to send a search party, which is, well, you understand how insane this looks on the county's budget sheets." I stared at him, numb. "Did they find anything?" He shook his head. "Not a trace. No footprints, no clothing, nothing." I remembered reading about the Salem witch trials, how entire communities whipped themselves into frenzy on scraps of evidence. Fear birthed illusions that felt real. Looking into Sam's eyes, I suspected he was wondering whether I'd started this hysteria, intentionally or not. That night, I sat alone on the porch of Ruth's house, watching the wind blow icy gusts across the dark street. Low clouds pressed overhead, and the street lamps glowed amber in the swirling flurries. At the corner, a shape flickered, half hidden by a parked truck. My chest tightened. Standing in the hush was a small figure wearing a blue coat, Henry's coat. "Henry," I gasped, leaping to my feet. The shape turned and fled behind the truck. I dashed across the yard, nearly slipping on a patch of ice. Rounding the vehicle, I found only empty shadows, the wind whipping stinging flakes into my eyes. I thought I saw footprints in the fresh snow, but the wind quickly erased them. My heart hammered, adrenaline roaring in my ears. I stumbled inside, chest burning from the cold, hands shaking as I latched the door. That was no dream, it was real. Or at least it felt real. As I stood there, gasping, Ruth emerged from the shadows of the hallway, eyes wide with alarm. "I heard shouting," she said. I couldn't form a coherent explanation. She took one long look at my trembling hands and pulled me into a hug. I felt a surge of anger that I even needed comfort, that I was falling apart. But mostly I felt confusion. Was I perpetuating this madness? Early the next morning, I made a decision. I needed to confront the sight of the fire head-on, no tiptoeing around. I needed closure. Snow hammered down as I trudged to the old property. My breath fogged the air, and each step crunched with finality. The blackened framework of the house loomed ahead, a skeleton in a ghost town. I slipped through the charred remains of what used to be the front door. Inside, patches of snow had drifted across the wreckage. Twisted metal, shattered glass, half-burned furniture. This was the reality. No living boy would ever hide here. A sudden wave of regret tightened my throat. I remembered Henry's laughter echoing in these halls. I couldn't do this, I thought. But I pushed on, heading toward the remains of Henry's bedroom at the back of the house. In the gloom, I heard a faint scraping sound. I froze. Something metallic clattered, followed by a sharp intake of breath. With cautious steps, I moved toward the noise. I peered around a corner of half-collapsed drywall. My heart jolted as I spotted a crouched figure in the shadows, small, indeed, wearing a child's coat. I stumbled, nearly dropping my flashlight. Fear and hope collided in my chest. Then the figure turned, and I saw the face. A teenage boy, maybe 15, dirt-smeared, eyes wild. He carried a crowbar in one hand, rummaging through the debris. When he noticed me, his face contorted into terror. He bolted for the half-intact window, shards of glass still in the frame. I lunged, grabbing his coat. It tore, revealing a battered duffel bag jammed with stolen items from the debris. Bits of copper, old photo frames, anything he could sell. He must have found Henry's child-sized coat in the wreck and put it on for warmth, oblivious to the heartbreak stitched into every fiber. "Hey!" I yelled, voice breaking, but he wrenched free and scrambled out the window, vanishing into the swirling snow. I stared, stunned by the anticlimax, tears threatening. So that was it, some desperate runaway or petty thief, fueling the rumors unwittingly. He must have been spotted around town, and people's grief-laden minds twisted him into Henry. We'd all been so willing to see the son we lost. The wind howled through the broken walls. My legs gave out, and I sank onto a charred plank, body trembling. Relief warred with despair. The sightings, the footprints, explainable after all. But the finality sank in. Henry was really gone. I might have stayed there forever, lost in the swirl of ashes and melted snow, but a shout at the doorway caught my attention. Sam stood at the threshold. He must have followed me. Behind him, a pair of officers. He approached quietly, noticing my tear-streaked face. "You okay?" he asked softly. We saw him run off. I nodded, letting out a shuddering breath. Just some kid stealing scraps. My eyes fixed on Henry's scorched toy chest, half buried in debris. He was wearing Henry's coat. Sam crouched beside me, the two of us lost in the hiss of wind. Eventually, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "We'll find him," he said. "He's probably from out of town, a runaway. We can help him." I didn't respond. Instead, I just stared at the remnants of Henry's room, letting the reality anchor me. Ash caked the back of my throat, and the cold stung my cheeks, but I felt more awake than I had in weeks. The illusions, the sightings. They were illusions for certain folks, but for me, something else had lurked beneath. Guilt, hope, denial. I'd clung to a flicker that maybe Henry was still there. Even as I wanted to move on, I secretly harbored the impossible. Sam helped me stand. We walked through the rubble, stepping over beams and shattered glass until we reached the yard, where the officers waited. They had their radios out, scanning for any sign of the fleeing teen. In the distance, I glimpsed neighbors gathered on the street, drawn by the police cars. The hush in their expressions told me they were hungry for an explanation, perhaps even reluctant to let go of the miracle they'd imagined. Finally, as I reached the road, I turned back for one last look at the charred skeleton of the house. The snow swirled in the silent yard, erasing footprints almost as soon as they appeared. At the edge of my vision, I thought I saw movement. A quick flicker like a child ducking behind a broken fence. But when I stared directly, there was only the wind stirring the ashes. Sam squeezed my shoulder. "Come on," he said gently, guiding me away. I swallowed hard, letting the winter air burn in my lungs. With each step, the weight of my grief pressed into me, yet I felt a sliver of clarity. Henry was at rest. What the town saw, what I nearly believed, it was the echo of a desperate wish shared by everyone who'd loved him, or simply by those enthralled by the story of a vanished boy. We'd all wanted to believe that tragedies could be undone, that second chances might appear in footprints on the snow. But real life isn't so kind. In the end, all we have is the memory of a smile in the flames, and the knowledge that some illusions are born from the darkest corners of our broken hearts. When the storm finally passed that evening, I left a single blue flower at Henry's grave. The wind carried the scent of pine and distant chimney smoke. I closed my eyes, said my goodbye, and turned away, feeling the hush of winter settle. And, for the first time since the fire, the silence felt like something I could bear.